Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. Today's episode is the third of 8 podcasts recorded at Delta's National Duck Hunters Expo this past July. I sat down with Andrew Murray and Tyler Jordan from Realtree. As Delta's official Camo Conservation Partner, we talked about the creation and launch of Realtree's new waterfowl camo, Max 7. Let's bring in today's guests. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thanks for having us, Joel.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, very, very excited to be here, and it's been fun.
You know, it's great. So, you guys, where do you guys live exactly?
Well, the headquarters for Realtree is in Columbus, Georgia, so we live in Columbus, Georgia right now.
Okay.
Yep.
So both
I was born and raised in Columbus. Yep.
Born and raised. Yeah, that's pretty special. So, you know, guys, Realtree has been an amazing company, amazing partner for Delta Waterfowl. And I just have to start out by saying thank you. I mean, the sponsorship opportunities, the support that you guys provide us, where we can do the work that we do as the Duck Hunters organization. You know, little things from, sponsoring one of the stages here at the Expo to, sponsoring our Duck ID guide, that we sell to new hunters. And so we can't thank you guys enough and appreciate it.
No, it's been a fun partnership over the years. I remember, at least for me, I've been with the company 10 years, and the first time you guys walked in, it was different faces, I think, at the time, walked into SHOT Show and sat down with the then VP, Ray Lynch, and went through, and he's like telling me why you guys are so much better than the other conservation groups and how you guys are like the Duck Hunters, conservation group. And I was like, yeah, I'm all in. I was like, these guys are awesome.
It's been a great partnership, and conservation obviously runs really deep with everything we do at Realtree, and we can't really thank Delta enough for having us in their family, and being a part of this first expo has been a fun experience too. The show just started for everybody that's listening right now. It just opened up.
That's right. That's great. So one of the things that I like to do is, I don't want to just talk about the company, because I think a company is made of the people that work for it. And I'd love for our listeners to get to know Realtree, get to know the people a little bit more. So I'd love for the listeners to get to know you guys. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, not about Realtree.
Yeah, so for those, obviously, no one knows me, unlike Tyler. But I've been with Realtree now 10 years, but originally I grew up in California. I was born there for 21 years, and I wasn't a hunter. I was into the outdoors and hiking and fishing, and it wasn't until I went to school here in Arkansas, just 45 minutes north of here, and I went to school with some of the guys who now operate behind the scenes on Duck Commander. And I remember going there and those guys trying to get me to duck hunt. And I was like, man, it's just, I don't know. It sounds cool, but I don't know. And he's like, one of them, I went to school with one of the nieces and cousins to Phil Robertson.
Okay.
And they're like, hey, you want to come down and meet the Duck Commander? I was like, I don't know who that is. And Phil's going to be here later today over at the booth. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And fast forward about 7 years later, I went to school for graphic design and marketing major, design major, and I was in working in advertising agencies for companies that had clientele like Bushnell, Remington Firearms, released the Versamax at that time, Toyota Fishing, and then got into Under Armour when UA Hunt was a big thing. So that's where I kind of got into fall in love with it. But when we were doing the Remington Versamax and we were releasing that, I turned to one of the guys I was working with. I was like, hey, can you take me on my first duck hunt? I really want to know what this is about. I'm one of those guys that if you're going to be marketing something or talking to something and trying to be authentic, which I think that's the key in advertising, is being authentic to the consumer. So I wanted to really know what it was about and experience it. So they took me on my first duck hunt. It was in Eufaula, Oklahoma. And the first time we had some green-winged teal buzz by and little left to right action, shot once and killed it. And I was like, okay, I get it. I get it. And ever since then, it was working with guys like Michael Waddell and then going down to the Realtree farms to do a photo shoot and hanging out with the Realtree guys. And they had an opening as the creative director at Realtree, and I was like, they asked me, hey, would you be interested in the job? Because they saw what I was doing and how I was operating. I was like, yeah, I'd be really interested. So I came back home from Georgia, and I told my wife, I was like, hey, what do you think about moving to Georgia? she's like, yeah, I think it's pretty loud. That's like, yeah, that's okay. And she's an Oklahoma girl, so we flew out there, and that was 10 years ago. And so I've been the creative director at Realtree for the past 10 years, but my role's changed here recently. Really, when we started doing the Realtree fishing brand, I started helping out a little bit more on the pattern development side, on the fishing stuff. And then we've had some people to kind of change from our pattern development side and working really well with Tyler's dad, Bill, Mr. Jordan, and how we get along. So I've come on full time to do the pattern development now and design the camos alongside his dad and Bill, and kind of work this out. And Max 7 for us, which we're excited to launch here at the show, was kind of my first hands-on experience working on a actual hunting camo pattern. But I'm a huge, now ever since that first teal I shot, like I'm a hardcore hunt, 20 plus years.
You're probably the most hardcore waterfowl person in the office. I would say you and Brian Doman. I mean, you're two of the most hardcore waterfowl people we have at the company.
So so Tyler, this is like, Bill's gotten to this place. If you talk to him and about really wanting to have multiple people deep, and he's wanting to see the future and pass the baton off to Tyler a lot on his responsibilities, and kind of get the younger people in the company to take on more responsibility. So Max 7 was Tyler's first real experience working on a pattern as well. So he kind of got the kickstart, and he could kind of talk about the vision that started, and I kind of took that from where they were at and took it to completion. So it's been fun.
Yeah, I want to push that one back just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
But we have to go there because that's the cool part of the story. But Tyler, let's not assume that everybody knows who you are.
Yeah.
Let's talk about just your background, who you are.
Well, I guess it's hard for me to talk about myself without mentioning anything in Realtree, just because I've kind of grown up in and around this industry for so long. But ever since I was 3 or 4 years old, grew up turkey hunting, deer hunting alongside my dad. I'm sure, for people that remember the TNN days, watching Realtree Outdoors on TNN, then the transition to ESPN. I feel like I've always been in the woods ever since I was really little. But I'm not a waterfowl hunter necessarily. I mean, I like waterfowl hunting, but, growing up where we did in Georgia, it's not a good waterfowl state. I mean, I think I went on one duck hunt with my dad when I was 12 years old. Went to Arkansas, had a great hunt, but it wasn't until I graduated from the University of Mississippi, and it wasn't until I actually went there that I didn't go on my first real duck hunt. Mm-hmm. And then I realized when I moved to Mississippi, going to college, duck hunting is a religion out there at Ole Miss. And, Arkansas, getting to hunt there some when I was in school, those 4 or 5 years. I developed a love and a passion for it, not as much as maybe the turkey hunting and deer hunting that I'm used to, but then moving back home, kind of working in marketing, maybe wearing a few different hats in the company, just trying to learn every aspect of the business as I can. And then, I like the pattern side of it and Dad's creative process, just because I've been involved just with him, just through watching, ever since I can remember, of watching maybe Realtree All Purpose and seeing that from Realtree Extra to Realtree Edge, even Realtree Max 5. And whenever Dad was kind of mentioning to me about doing another waterfowl pattern, I'm like, why would you want to change up from what we have with Max 5? Just because it's been so successful. It's been kind of a staple in this industry. But Dad just like, we can do it better. There's something we can do. I think it's just like any artist that feels like, man, you let enough time go by, you think, man, I can improve this from what it once was. And so, kind of being on the ground floor with that and actually kind of getting my hands, deep and involved on that process was a lot of fun. Working with Andrew, Dad, and many others in the company. So, it's been a fun ride.
Was there ever a point where you considered doing something else, or was it always part of your vision to be part of the family business?
I think, when I went to school, when I graduated high school, I was like, man, what if I just go and start working in the business right away? That did cross my mind. But, Dad was like, my mom and Dad both supported me in going off to school, spending.
Not to cut you off,
Yeah.
but I mean, at the time, because I was there in the company, but I remember when you were going off to Ole Miss and that little transition. There was a time when I know, not that he didn't want to work at Realtree and be part of it and keep that on, but there was a time in your life there, a couple of years, where he was really wanting to go off and do something just to get out away from it for a little bit and come back and a little bit stronger, just to experience things, right?
Yeah, I think those 4 or 5 years that, because I was like, when I graduated high school, I was like, man, I'll just go right into the business. But luckily, Mom and Dad, I'm glad they did now, because I even met my wife out in college at Ole Miss. But they said, you need to go experience and figure out what you want to do. And those 4 or 5 years were great for me, just to kind of go off and do my own thing for a while and just have some separation, because I've always grown up in and around the business, hunting, which is still what I did even when I was in school. But I found my way back, and I'm happy just kind of working full time there now at Realtree. But it never really crossed my mind on going and choosing another career path. I knew if I didn't do something at Realtree, I'd still be in this industry in some capacity.
Okay. Yeah. Forgive me for wandering, but I grew up from a long line of hunters, and so I've said this before to others. I said it had been weird for me not to be a hunter. I don't remember my first hunt because I was too young. But for you, Tyler, where hunting was part of the public eye, did you guys get out privately and do a lot of hunting? Was that a big component of your childhood too?
It was. The first 3 deer I took were not on camera with a bow, and so that was great for me. And then these last 3 or 4 years, I've shot many turkeys off camera, which is kind of, I feel like years ago would have been really weird to say. I feel like it would have been a wasted opportunity not to capture something and get it on film, put it up on YouTube or put it on Realtree Outdoors. But just that solitude and being out there alone and experiencing how hunting is maybe meant to be. I've always been used to having one person or more with me in the woods, and so it's been nice. Whether it's just going on a doe hunt on our farm just by myself. So
I was going to say, you do a lot of land management that's not filmed. That type of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on just year round. Obviously for deer hunting and turkeys that you do a lot alone and by yourself. So yeah, it's nice to kind of go and just kind of refresh and go out there alone hunting.
Well, it does put. I've done a bit of videoed hunting over my career, and it does put a little different, I guess, pressure might be the word, but it really changes it. So I think I'm glad to hear that you've had those opportunities to get out.
Yeah, I would say too, like Realtree Outdoors, the way it's filmed versus what we do currently now on YouTube. Like I'm hosting a digital show on YouTube, Realtree Road Trips. But it always felt to me like when you were doing Realtree Outdoors, at the time we had 20 episodes that we would film for Outdoor Channel. Well, you just felt pressure from getting from one state to the next and trying to have a successful hunt, or at least just an encounter so you could film an episode. But then the digital stuff, it's more about the journey than it really is just maybe the kill or the success of a hunt. And so I'm kind of able to slow down and enjoy things a little bit more instead of feeling pressure of moving from one place to the next, just to get something on camera. So that's been kind of the beauty of the transition of the digital and the YouTube world that we live in.
Okay.
But some of our first duck hunts me and you went on here in Arkansas, we didn't have a camera guy with us. I had my camera just to take some stills and stuff, but I mean, I don't know how many times it doesn't snow in Arkansas very often, but like the one time, one of the best hunts we've been on, we were in flooded timber, snowing, and had a limit of mallards, and it was one of those times where it was like, I wish we had a camera with us, right?
That's right.
But a lot of the duck hunts that he had been on, or at least we've been on originally, like weren't filmed at all.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a successful hunt with all the cameras, it means you're doing something right.
Yeah.
That's
You're
right.
hiding well, it's a good setup, so that's good. Hey, Tyler, you were talking before we started hitting the record button, you were talking about some of your dad's, guess you were about to say that how your dad got into camouflage and developing camouflage. I think that was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool story. Back in the day, and not that I was alive for any of this, but Walmart and other retailers, it was mainly military camouflage. I think tree bark was another one that was very popular back then when Dad was getting his start. But Dad is a marketing major. He graduated from the University of Mississippi. But I think what a lot of people don't know about Dad, and it's not really well known, is he's a really good artist. He can draw really good. Like, I've seen him, just sketch things, and I'm like, wow, you're really, really good. So the first 3 or 4 patterns that we had at Realtree, Dad actually hand drew himself. The leaves, the bark, the background, and just to have that kind of visualization is something that I think a lot of people don't really know. I think while we do a lot of stuff graphically on the computer now, it's still, you have to kind of pull it out of Dad's head. While he doesn't do that part, he still has a vision for what a pattern look and feels like. And I really do believe that's kind of what has separated maybe us from maybe the competition for a long time. Is Dad is still very hands-on, and there's a lot to be learned there from his expertise.
And it eats at him. If you're around him and designing a camo pattern, it eats at him that he doesn't know the computer programs. Like, if someone was willing to do the time, but we think it's too dangerous. To teach him how to do all the computer graphics stuff, he wouldn't leave the computer.
Really?
Yeah, and he talks about it all the time about how he wishes he could do that because it's all in his head. He knows exactly what he wants or how he wants it, color tones, everything else, what could be done, and he would play with it all day long. But it's just the advancement of technology, and he uses people, I guess, like me, hands and stuff, and we interpret it, and we go back and forth and feed off of one another, and it's a different dynamic. But yeah, his artistic level is still. That's why I just admire him for that fact of you could be 74, I think, and he's been doing this for as long as he has. But his passion has not dimmed one bit, and his vision and what he's doing and how he pushes you and how he wants to see stuff. And it's a lot of the patterns you can see, they might be slight evolutions or slight adaptations, but everything is a reason. And sometimes you'll look at it and be like, I don't know if this is going to work, or really, Bill? And you go try it and you're like, dang, it worked.
Well, it's just like ever since Realtree AP, at the time, I think AP was in 2007, and I don't know how old I would have been then, but when he was talking about coming out with another pattern to replace Realtree AP, I said, why? Why AP's been so successful? How could you make a pattern any better than that? He said, Tyler, enough time has gone by. We can work and tweak and try something different and have a different spin on what another pattern, another generation of patterns might be. And I'm like, I just don't know. Like, I had doubts, and even moving from Realtree Extra to Realtree Edge, I'm like, why would you change again? But he proves me wrong time and time again that there is a market out there for something maybe even slightly different.
Well, he's just the type of person, like, if you know him and you know his personality, he's a perfectionist. And so I know, I'll bring this up, Tyler loves Realtree Original. Absolutely loves it. Like, that's his favorite pattern. Yeah. He's pushing us to, like, we've got some samples, but like Tyler's wants to, do a bunch of these throwback patterns. But to be honest, and Bill's talked about this is the reason why I'll say it, like, for Bill, he looks at that pattern as his first failure.
That's really
what it is. That's how he views it. And so I view it as heritage. I'm sure a lot of us do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where Realtree got its start, was the first Realtree Original. Well, Dad views that as like,
he could do so much better. So when he looks at it, he looks at it as like, when you're a kindergartner and you did your first little sun sketch or like family photo or sketch of your stick figures. He looks at that as on that level, and he cringes when he sees it because he knows how much better it could have been and how it can be. So each time we come out with a pattern, it's really not that we're coming out with a new pattern to come out with a new pattern. Bill's still, he'll look at those patterns daily, and he just knows what he could do better. So he finally talks us into working with him to improve the pattern and make the improvements that he wanted to make all along.
Yeah.
Basically is how it goes. And technology finally catches up to where we can maybe do some of the stuff he wants.
I mean, Realtree Original, this is what I think is so cool about it. I mean, he sketched it. He drew that first pattern. So I'm like, man, that's part of our legacy. That's where Realtree got its start. That's why we've been here for 35 plus years. But he views it as just, man, that is something I'm embarrassed of almost, you know, because that was my first, maybe not failure, but I think the pattern may have spent a year and a half to 2 years in the market, and then he was on to drawing something else and better and different. So he views that as maybe the first rendition of Realtree, and everything we've done since then has been a drastic improvement.
Yeah, I think I'm not an artist. I don't study paintings, but I do understand in general that artists typically don't like some of their best work, at least best work viewed by the public. So your dad's an artist.
Yeah, I guess he's a perfectionist is how I call him. I mean, he always is looking and striving to be better, which is, like I said before, I really feel like what has separated us from everybody else. No disrespect to any competition, but Dad is just always and constantly striving to improve and be better. And when he lets enough time go by, he's ready to go. Everybody's like, why do you want to come out with another pattern? You said it. He just feels like he can do it better than he did before.
Yeah, and I mean, we get on timelines of, you know, we're developing a camo pattern. Max 7 was 4 years in the making. It may be a little bit longer. And, you know, for him, he would still tweak it and perfect it. But, you know, eventually we start talking to partners and say, hey, we're going to be doing this because we got to prepare them to move out of a pattern. And, you know, sometimes we get hung up on ourselves because Bill's still wanting to make tweaks. Like, he still wants it perfect, and we're finally like, Bill, okay, we hit that deadline. We got to put it to bed, and you can move on to your next one, you know.
That's every pattern.
Every pattern's like that. But that's kind of how it is. We finally have to just tell him we can't do it anymore. We can't make any more tweaks.
Yeah.
But
He's a tortured artist, as some might say.
I mean, that's what it is. He's a tortured artist. And, you know, it's like Andrew said, a lot of our gun companies, clothing companies, I mean, you got to let a lot of these companies, just for timelines of their product, a year and a half, sometimes 2 years in advance on the guns. So, I mean, he's got to have that print finished and completed by a certain date. And every time it's tough for Dad to just put a coffin on it, you know.
And then the process of how we do camo patterns, I mean, you see, you know, I understand that there's the trend of going back to I think the heritage patterns, and it's funny because the cycle of, you know, military type camo patterns that were around before stick and limb camo patterns kind of came into the play. And it seems like that's the trend that's coming back is, you know, the more abstract digital patterns, military-esque type patterns. And so you're going through this cycle of all this. But it is funny because when you go and try to create a type of pattern like what we do, which is highly photorealistic, it's based off of all these millions of colors. But when you go to actually get that developed, the process of that is so much more cumbersome than to do a digi pattern or military type pattern.
Right.
And because you're just, you know, limited in colors and everything else. And so I feel like that's the other part that people really don't understand about our business is the development side and how much goes into it. And that's why really there's only maybe two or three of us in the industry that do it, you know, the way that we do it. And we've got to a place where we know it's a labor of love. And, you know, again, it goes to what Bill, his thing of wanting to be perfect. And it's his, you know, the mentality of what would you rather be, like resemble, you know, what you hunt in or actually look like. And so, you know, and we know that that's what he wants to do, and that's why our name is Realtree, and we try to resemble things that look real, but by doing that and through his perfectionist, like the process of that and to get it right is so much more difficult than what I think the average consumer knows.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to take this opportunity because I feel like camouflage has two purposes. One of them is it has to be that the consumer must like how it looks, right?
Of course.
You're selling camouflage to a person because, I mean, we're at an expo. Actually, surprisingly, there's not that many people wearing camouflage, but camouflage is a color, right? For many people. Like, I like blues, I like blacks, I like wearing camouflage today. So that has to be part of the consideration, is making something look good.
Dad's saying, it's so true, before it disappears in the woods, it's got to disappear off the shelf.
Okay.
It's got to have shelf appeal as well.
Yeah, we always say it's got to have shelf appeal, but at the same time, at the end of the day, that shelf appeal has to be effective in the woods. Mm-hmm. Like or in the marsh or wherever it is. Like, so we look at, obviously, the effectiveness of it first and foremost, and then you look at it, is it going to look good on the shelf? And so 100%, that's always taken into consideration. Yeah. But we think when you make a pattern that looks aesthetically pleasing, and we check off all the boxes of how a camo pattern should be put together and what it should do, then it's not only going to be effective, but it's going to look good on the shelf.
That's right.
Okay. So I'm curious about the function of the camo. Taking it to the woods, going hunting. How do you guys? What's the thought process, the approach of testing, development? You must...
Oh, it's long. It's very, very long.
Yeah.
Like I said, 4 years in the making, and Tyler could talk a little bit about like how it got started and the thought process behind that. But when I came to Realtree, we had just launched Extra, and then Max 5 was my first big pattern that I worked on to get out in the market. And so I know when we were trying to go into Max 5, one of the key things, and mainly because Tyler was at Ole Miss and was just getting into duck hunting big time, and what a lot of the guys down there were doing was hunting in flooded timber. And we didn't want to necessarily make, at the time, a pattern strictly for hunting timber. We did now with Realtree timber. Like, we've perfected it, and that there's a long story behind that. A lot of it has to do with we try to put original back out on the market for timber hunting.
Okay. And Dad shut it down.
Bill was like, no, I'm not doing it. So he's like, I can do it better. So he came out with timber. And he's like, look you want original? Like, here's timber. Look at how much better it is. And that's really how and why timber came to the market. Yeah. But with Max 5, one of the things we were trying to do is make a reeds pattern that worked well in the field, but also could work in most flooded timber type situations. Okay. And so that was the thought process. Now, when we got into adapting, because we did come out with timber with Max 7, we knew that we didn't really need to make a pattern that was going to work in flooded timber, because we had that already with timber. So what we were trying to do is look at mainly where we like to hunt, which is, and Tyler can talk about this, is going out to Louisiana and Arkansas and looking at flooded rice fields and the mud and the coloration of that. And he kind of started that off and got that as the base of it. So the start of the pattern was I was working with another one of a couple other people in marketing, and Dad said, take this camera. He had a few buddies in Mississippi that have duck clubs. He said, just go get a bunch of pictures. And so sometimes we'll look through those pictures and pick out different elements as just kind of a starting point for this new pattern, which we didn't have a name for it yet. But I remember I was in Mississippi, and I had my Canon camera, and I remember looking down, and like it was so cool the way the reeds, and then like the breakup in the mud, like the pieces of the mud were like in chunks, and it was almost like I don't know, like if I saw the pattern, I could show it to you and point it out. But I was like, man, that is a camo pattern. That is a place to start. I may be crazy. Dad may hate this, but I said I feel like this is a perfect starting point for us to start layering on top. But I feel like this is where maybe this is going to be the background. Well, I took several pictures of that, of what I was seeing, and then we took it back, and Dad liked it. And then so from that point on, and that background of that pattern is where we really started with Max 7. And then with Andrew, Dad, going through some of the other images, and then going on more photo shoots. That's what people don't understand, is like just that one little shoot I was on, we may have taken 15 to 20% of what Max 7 ended up being. Yeah. And then, and then probably going to 75%, then going back to 50, then back to 75% again. There's just, a constant, tug of war almost in this pattern and the final product. But yeah, that's kind of where it started, was just, on that photo shoot. And getting to know, I've always been pretty intimate I try to be with the pattern launches and getting to know what the pattern is, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. But actually being part of the development of it, I've looked at it completely different and I feel like it's a little easier for us. We do some of the fishing patterns. They're a lot more abstract. They don't have as much of a story. There's a purpose behind it, maybe a little bit more fashionable. But for us, like when you go try to do either a deer pattern or a duck pattern or turkey pattern, we know what the environment we're trying to match is.
Sure.
So for this, like one of the things is Max 4 I felt like was, obviously a great field pattern. It did really well, but if you were to take it into, some muddy areas or to flooded timber, like it wasn't going to be the best. And how we look at, how we kind of consider patterns, at least I feel like we do, is we know that our patterns, Bill tries to create patterns for the everyday hunter. So, we have very few niche patterns, but for the most part, he's very like consumer conscious. So he knows that he wants to make a pattern. It might not be the best pattern. 99% of the time, we feel like it is going to be the best pattern in that environment. But even if it's not the best pattern, it's going to be top 2 patterns that, like, in terms of effectiveness. So we build a pattern that's going to work in most places at 90% of the time, or most of the times, if not every time, so that you don't have to go out and buy 17 different camo patterns to make it look like you're going to blend in with all these different places you're going to be going. So it is trying to figure out how the best combination of photography, color elements, how we're going to get that depth and contrast and everything into the pattern, and how is that going to hide the human form and silhouette and blend in. And as we go through that process, we totally keep in mind what the consumer is going to be doing and how we can honestly, at the end of the day, kind of save them money by having a pattern that's going to be the best in most situations, if not all situations, you're going to find yourself hunting. So with Max 7, even though we did have a niche pattern, because not everybody we know as duck hunters gets the opportunity or is blessed to hunt in green timber down here in Arkansas. Like, we know that's kind of like a specialty thing unless you live down here. So we know that. So we start looking at what do most duck hunters hunt like, and how do they hunt? And it's hedgerows, potholes, off the banks. Right. And I personally am a big natural cover hunter. And I think Tyler is too. Like, we'll get in a blind every now and then if you're with some people who are doing that. But if I'm off on my own, I'm going to use the natural cover around me. And so having that mindset, I want my camo pattern to blend in as much as possible with what I'm in and around, so I don't have to worry about it. You got to worry about so many different things. We talk about this on the deer hunting side. You got to worry about so many different elements that go into hunting. And one of our catchphrases is like, your camo shouldn't be one of them, right? Like,
True.
Really, you shouldn't be worrying about having to be hidden. So, you got to worry about your duck. The duck's even going to be there. And one of the things with Max 7 for us is our tagline, and what we discuss is, from a waterfowl perspective, is the X. And obviously we're playing off the Max, X and Max, but also the X in duck hunting is where ducks want to be, right?
Right.
That's the landing spot. And I don't care. You could have the best decoy setup, the best duck calling, the best blind, but if those birds want to be 100 or 200 yards away,
They're going to be there.
They're going to be there. And I've been on, I'm sure you have too, plenty of hunts that's more than frustrating, is like, we can't get to that spot. We know that's where the birds want to be because we can't hide well enough. Or you're with too many people, so you can't hide in certain places. And nothing's more frustrating than to be a duck hunter sitting there and then watch the birds land 200 yards away.
You know where the X is.
Yeah.
You just can't get there.
Yeah, so one of the things and the idea behind what we were trying to do with Max 7 was create a camo pattern, and we tested this out in California this past January with Chad Belding and the Merlot Waterfowl guys. A lot of times when you look, snow geese are I feel like some of the harder birds to hunt, even though there's so many, because there's so many. They got so many eyeballs. Mm-hmm. So we actually laid out just into the decoys, and we're just in Max 7, and we shot 108 in one morning. When you're able to add anything to your camouflage, and the camo kind of just does itself, like that's what we're looking for. And anything like as we go about it, like, I mean, we're trying to think, even if you're in a blind, we want to be able to give you a pattern. Like, even if you're going to do an A-frame blind or something, you know, most of the times guys are going to buy, even if they buy solid colors, they're going to go in there and spray paint it and brush it in. But we still think, like, if you have a pattern, that Max 7 pattern there as the base, you're going to be so much better off, because it's less work for you. I mean, at the end of the day, that's why we do the camouflage, is so that it's less work on you, and it helps you out in the end, but gives you kind of a shortcut. It's a cheat code to being more successful in the field.
Yeah, effectiveness for Dad, and that's why it goes back to Realtree Original being his least favorite. Effectiveness and design is priority number one always for what we do.
So what are some of the differences with Max 7 from, I guess, maybe the most recent version?
Yeah, so the biggest thing what I was trying to get at with Max 5 and Max 7 was we had the intentions of trying to make Max 5 blend into flooded timber. We took that idea out the window with Max 7. So what we were able to do, and really with the base that he was talking about of that muddy kind of background, was really looking at more field hunting and maybe flooded rice, flooded fields, and ponds. And what does that look like? Well, we added different hues and colors and pockets of color. There's actually probably it doesn't look like it sometimes when you look at Max 7 with the way it's broken up and it's cut up sometimes, but there's about 20% less reeds, which makes the pattern less yellow and that color inside of Max 7. So when you're actually out and if you're in a field, whether it's milo or corn or even winter wheat, you know how those rows are built up. So we kind of looked at that as a base and then try to get that coloring right, because I've heard all these guys, and for me, I'm a photographer as well. Like Tyler knows this, and some of these arguments of deer or animals or whatever, they view things in this way or this way. You know, even if a deer sees things in black and white or doesn't see color, if you're a photographer and you know how the camera and the eye works and how contrast works, if you are matching a background based off of color that you see in 100% spectrum, color spectrum, if you turn that photo into a black and white, then you're going to blend in even more.
Oh, sure.
Because the hues and the tones of what you're doing match exactly the hues and tones of your surrounding.
Right.
So just because something doesn't see color, if you can match that color perfectly or as close as possible, you're going to blend in even better. So this whole idea of like, oh, we don't need to be right on color or contrast, like that's
not true.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Because depending on how they see things, so that's what Bill is, a big color guy. Like, he wants to make sure that we're matching stuff, and we find out that a lot of our gray tones that we have in the background, there's these little pockets. Not only do they come in to help out with contrast, to help break up your body, but it also works well when you have that brackish water that you might be kicking up to make it look like ducks feeding, and it kind of has that cloudiness that's in that background to really blend in, but it has the reeds that you kind of see. And then the other thing that we did big time on this pattern is, because I had been seeing it, and I know a couple of us have been seeing it, what other people have been putting on the market from a bird's eye view, and how it wasn't looking too well and how it wasn't blending in. Okay. So we did everything when we started testing was we got drones and we flew over everything of what does it look like from the bird's point of view. And we wanted to make sure that it blended in. And so some of the first test shots we did with it when we had some digital print-offs of it, we did bird's eye views in cornfields and some ponds and some other things, and it blended in. I was like, holy crud, like, I can't believe like we're this close already. Like, I mean, I was really, really impressed. We started showing it to partners. We're like, yeah, when can we get it? And we're like, oh gosh.
That was the first shoot.
Yeah, the first shoot.
I bet you drones have really changed the product testing world. Because, yeah, if you think about it, actually you kind of said it. If we're looking from a human perspective, we're standing on the water, someone's hiding in the cattails. How do you look? But that's not what a duck sees.
No.
If a duck is seeing you from that perspective,
they should be dead.
It's too late for that duck, right?
Yeah.
It's all over. Camouflage isn't going to matter anymore. So, Tyler, why don't you tell me, and thank you guys for releasing this to the public today at the Expo. When will, or is it already out in the marketplace?
Yeah, so yes, it is already out in the marketplace. We have several partners that have already carried it. A lot of the main ones with Bandit and Drake already have products available. There are several gun companies. I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure which ones, but I think a lot of the main ones already are carrying it.
Browning and Benelli, we have over in the booth, along with Rete. We'll have it. We talked about those. I will say the biggest difficulty that we've had with Max 7 has been COVID.
Yeah.
This has been the hardest. What people, again, going back to how intricate and how tough it is to get a pattern this photorealistic done, really requires hands down and a hands-on interaction with it. And unfortunately, not to get anywhere political or anything, but there's just not a lot of companies here in the States that go through the same process or allow us to work with it. So a lot of that is overseas in China. And over the last 2 years, we haven't been able to get to China to really work. So we've been having to do a lot of that versus telecommunications.
Sure.
And I'll tell you what, that's trying to develop a pattern over the phone is a nightmare.
It's tough. No, it's tough. And there's a lot of stuff available right now. But, you can go and buy Realtree branded hoodies, hats, jackets already on our store.
Yeah, store.realtree.com.
Licensed partners are already carrying things. But as the fall starts to progress and we get into October and November, more and more will come available.
Okay. No, that's great. Yeah, I do want to flag for everybody, go to Realtree.com and you can take a look at the new pattern.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think...
Actually, I think it's Realtree.com / Max 7. You can
we'll
go
get
on
you
there.
straight to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I have to say, camouflage development sounds simple. You guys make it sound
it's
really challenging.
It's really challenging because you again, I understand why a lot of the trend is to go into simplified patterns or abstract patterns because you're working with simple colors and you can deal with that. But when you take a photo, it's a million different colors, and how the printing process goes when you go into wet print or heat transfer, you have to go from 12 colors, and then heat transfer you have to go to 8 colors. So you have to come up with a calculation of how to make all those million colors through the combination of just those 12 or 8 colors.
Jeez.
So
it's like a Rubik's Cube of
it
colors.
It is.
It's a nightmare.
It is, and it's we've got a way to figure it out, and we've got it where you can do it and separate it and all that. It's very, very complicated, but so when we see people doing it, we understand because then trying to get that to match every single time on every single substrate, on every single gun, everything else, and have it look consistent across the board is extremely difficult. And most people don't want to go through the trouble of making it that perfect, but that's what makes us different.
Yeah. Takes time.
Well, I tell you guys, kind of wrapping things up here, I do have to say, I've always wanted to be a biologist. I've always wanted to be a part of conservation, duck production, giving back. But I'd have to say, when someone is in the hunting industry, it's a business, right? It is about making money. But I love companies that take that extra step and recognize that they also play a vital role in conservation. And you guys do, you guys are the official Camo Conservation Partner of Delta. My role at Delta is Chief Conservation Officer, so I'm the guy, working on one of the many guys, but working on our field programs, and to have the support of Realtree, it's amazing, and I can't thank you guys enough.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate everything. Obviously this is conservation runs deep in our company's history, and Delta's been a great partner and one that we're going to have hopefully for many, many years to come.
I hope so, guys. Well, great. Appreciate it. And anything that we missed that you'd like to cover?
I don't think so. I think we covered most of it. We talked
Yeah,
a lot about it.
Yeah, we got the history of the world, I think,
Yeah.
covered right there. So.
Go buy Max 7.
Go buy Max 7. Okay, Realtree.com / Max 7.
Yes.
Get you right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
see you guys.
Appreciate it.